Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Welcome to the Planning Board meeting of September 14th, 2023. First on the agenda is Yankee Land Development.
Hi, everybody.
This is a two-lot subdivision. All my comments have been addressed.
Rich?
This is on for resolution. All comments have been addressed.
And Pat?
Mr. Chairman, you have two resolutions. You have a negative declaration and final subdivision approval resolutions before you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll offer up the resolution of the Planning Board of the Town of Carmel, number 23-17, dated September 14, 2023, for tax map 76.15-1-12, Yankee Land Development Subdivision, seeker determination of significance, negative declaration.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, I'll offer the final subdivision approval resolution of the Planning Board of the Town of Carmel, 23-18, dated September 14, 2023, tax map 76.15-1-12, Yankee Land Development Subdivision.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Thank you. Thank you for all the work. We've seen you here quite a few times. Thank you. Next on the agenda, P&R Estate Corp., 122 Glenita Avenue, Carmel, New York, residential site plan. Mike, I believe you had some comments?
Yeah, the applicant now proposes to add an addition to the existing building. It's still going to be a four-family as it was before, but no. Didn't we talk about that the other day, that we put an addition on?
We did, but we kept it original.
You've got to use the
All right,
mic.
disregard that then.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, when you say kept it original, it's,
It was a
Going for a
mixed-use
two-
building
Yeah.
that they converted to a four, got caught, now they're here trying to legalize the four.
okay.
We discussed that they were gonna put an addition on and still keep four families, but now he's saying it's not going back to that, so it's gonna be original building footprint, still four families.
Oh, okay.
So area variances are required and a use variance is required from the zoning board of appeals.
Rich, you had some comments also?
Yes, referrals to the DEC, ECB, Carmel Fire Department, and DOT has been noted by the applicant. Permits from DEC for stormwater and ECB for wetlands. They have the ECB permit, and I believe they need to be referred to the ZBA. Referral to Putnam Department of Planning. They need to add a note to the drawing about that all curbs, sidewalks, and manholes, guide rails should be installed per section 128 of the town code. They need to provide all calculations for the site distances. Any retaining wall greater than 6 foot must be certified by a licensed structural engineer. Stormwater bonds, improved performance bond, associated engineering fee, and stormwater bond will be required for the site.
Thank you, Rich. And Pat, you also had some
I
comments?
did, Mr. Chairman. So this application was before us a few times. About a year ago was the last time. And as Mike just indicated, as you may remember, the project's evolved over time. So there have been modifications to the layout configuration of the site. The parking area was something we spent a bit of time dealing with in the back. That did require the wetland permit that Rich referenced earlier. Since that time, the applicant has provided some updates. So one of the issues we had was the curb cut in front of the property. They needed DOT. We have a preliminary letter from DOT indicating they'll grant the road opening permit. So that's a step that's been accomplished. And Rich was looking for sewer and water information, and there is a report that's been submitted to Rich, which he has to take a look at, dealing with those issues. All the other issues regarding site lighting and landscaping have already been addressed. So the next step, as Mike indicated, is the referral to the Zoning Board of Appeals. We do have to reach a determination of significance with respect to seeker prior to that because of the use variance that's involved with the zoning board. So our next step, prior to the referral, would be drafting a negative declaration if you're so inclined.
And we would want to remain, we would want to remain as lead agency, Pat.
You are.
Yeah. So, couple thoughts on this, and this has been around for a while, as Pat said, hopefully everyone's been out to the property. How long ago was this, how long has this been made as a four-family, been used as a four-family?
So I'm not the owner of the building. I believe it's been about 5 years now, 4.5, 5 years.
Okay. So here's the thing. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. You buy a house, you buy a two-family house, you use it as a four-family house, you get caught, and you legalize it. One part of me says, no, shame on me, it's a two-family house, that's why you bought it, remains a two-family house. The other part of me says, okay, we're gonna fix this up, and we're gonna have a better site. We're gonna certainly be better from a Board of Health approval, and fire, and all the code things that Mike and Rich look at. So actually, sometimes, in some ways, I'm betwixt and between on projects like this, because I don't wanna set the precedent of just buy it as a two-family, make it into a four-family, go back to the board a couple of years later, if you get caught. So that's why I struggled a little bit on this, Pat, just,
So the issue that we've often had with these is when, in instances where we've said, go back to the original two-family, even though it's been a four-family or a five-family or a six-family, they go back to a two-family, and then 3 months down the road, it's back to being a multiple
Right.
unit. That's what it's always been. Traditionally, that's what the owner wants to do, and that's what the building has sort of evolved into physically. So they're gonna be inclined to do it anyway.
although that's not reason for us.
It's not a reason for us, but that's just reality. So if you have an instance where the conversion improves the site in terms of landscaping and appearance and architecture, that's when you can make that judgment, and perhaps it is a benefit.
And that's a perfect lead-in for what, so my question to the applicant here is, so what are you doing for the town? I understand
Well,
you're gonna put in smoke
we-
detectors, I understand it's gonna be safer inside. What are you gonna do for curb appeal? That's a really nice strip of roadway
Well,
there, and how do we get it so that when Anthony drives down that street next year, he says, wow, that building looks nice, the other buildings should look like that? I think since we're staying lead agency on this, and I think it needs 5 or 6 variances, so we'll come back to us. I'd like you to
It
come
certainly-
back to us with some wows.
Okay, well, I think one of the biggest wows that we have on this site plan is removing all the front-loaded parking that comes right off Glenada Avenue. And I think that is the wow, and we're putting the parking all down on the side of the property. We talked about in the past of putting the shutters on the building, so it dress it up, and it would be shutters on all 3 sides of the building. And so, you know, and we did some residential style landscaping in the front with lawn area, and taking out that parking is the biggest benefit to the town. I'd like to also note that when the house was a two-family with a use of an office in it. So when we say, yes, it was a two-family with a business use, where they converted that one business use into a thing. So it's not as, in the applicant's mind, in my mind, not as bad as saying, hey, it was a two-family and we made it a fourth-family. It was kind of a hybrid use when they purchased the building, you know, almost 30 years ago now.
I'm sorry, I should ask yourself to introduce yourself.
I'm sorry, Robert Sherwood, landscape architect, representing the client.
Yeah, we're actually, they're giving up a mixed use for a four-family, so it is a little bit of a give and take there.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And the only way that they can clear up a violation is to come to this board, and that's why,
I like the project, I like the location of the building, I've gone past there several times. It just so happens today, when I was reviewing this, I had this thought, Robert just happens to be the applicant. So that's where I'm getting the, you know, what are you doing for the town? All of us on this board are really working hard on improving the appearance. Let me turn it over to the board, any questions the board might have.
I have a couple of questions, actually maybe for our consultants. So right now, this is zone mixed use and not multifamily?
right now, in my file, if you look at what was legal,
Yes.
it's a two-family over commercial.
Two-family over commercial? Okay. Does the current zoning support 4 families?
No, but it also does, and it doesn't support the mixed use either,
By our code, it doesn't support 4 families.
either one of them.
Also, as of right now, are these 4 apartments in health and safety violation? We have four apartments in a two-family
They code
house.
compliant, Mike.
There's got to be certain safety violations, I would assume.
I don't think so. My assistant's been there, because anything over two-family we inspect, so he won't release their CO until he checks that.
Because in my opinion, before we go forward, if this is the way we're going to go on the board, we need some assurances that this is going to be a safe environment for
100%.
families.
Sometimes that's the benefit we get out of a
And that would
conversion
be a
like this. It
benefit
now
that we
becomes
would get.
conforming instead of a fire trap.
Correct. So I'd like to see that, or confirmation of that. And just to piggyback on what the chairman said, I'd almost like to be able to see some type of elevations of the changes you made and possibly a landscaping plan.
It was, certainly a landscaping plan was submitted, and the
You
elevate.
have it there?
Yeah, I do have it tonight.
Would you
I
mind
did
turning to it?
not bring the elevations of the building, but we did discuss in previous meetings adding shutters to the building, black shutters, to dress it up.
If you have the landscaping plan there, if you would show us, please.
So currently, we're at 122 Gonida Avenue. As we come down on the right-hand side, leaving town, you have a large parking area that's all in the front, and they front-load the parking. So we talk about major impacts to the town. Obviously, it's safer for the town, better looking. So what we've done is a new curb cut, dropping down to eight parking spaces that are required. We've done some small ornamental trees, not block the sight line, which will be flowering. And then we have a mixed use of more residential style plantings of boxwoods and hydrangeas and some flowering perennials to give you that residential appeal. The parking being down below, there is a grade change. We're creating a walk. One of the units is like a basement unit, walks out back here. They would still enter their residential unit here. The other one would walk up the existing sidewalk. We put a new sidewalk into the front porch where the other 3 units have their access. So very much tried to bring the scale down and make it look residential.
Okay. No, thank you.
Anybody else with any comments? Now, Pat, we already are, we need a motion to be lead agency, or we already are?
We are lead agency.
I think we are. I think Rose checked it for us, so I think we are. It's been 2 years since they originally
Right,
agreed
that's why I
for us.
asked, it's been a
So
while.
I think we did it originally.
We just need to send to the,
We need to prepare the neg deck. We'd have a neg deck ready for the next meeting if you wish, and at that point, you can refer them to the zoning board, or you could refer it now for several months, or a month out, whatever.
this project's been around a while. I don't mind referring it now. I think it would help you out if we
Yeah.
refer it now.
It doesn't actually change anything, the deadline's today, so they missed it.
So they go to the next.
And
So
they're
it's
gonna
not
come
gonna
back
help
to
or
us
hurt 'em.
anyway. You're gonna come back to us anyway to hit on the points that Anthony and I both made. We like this project. It's a good project. It's,
And I certainly, I'll bring back the elevations, what it
Yeah.
looks like now and what the proposed are for your next meeting.
Yeah.
100%. But, yeah, if you want to wait to refer it next meeting, that's fine with the applicant.
it's gonna time out the same way. We'll get you to the zoning board. Okay.
So I need direction to prepare the neg deck.
What's up, Pat?
You need to vote to direct the preparation of the neg deck.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to prepare a negative declaration.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Have a nice night.
We'll see you next meeting.
Next on the agenda is Messina Family Trust, 174 Wixon Pond Road, site plan. We had quite a few comments on this. Mike, I know you had some.
Yep. The applicant is operating a commercial business in the residential zoning district. Use variances needed for the non-permitted use. Variances needed for lot area, 120,000 square feet are required. They have 79,507, so 40,000 square foot variance is needed. The rear concrete slab over the property line is now labeled to be removed. The slab and the asphalt must be removed prior to the issuance of a CO for the property. The pool house, shed, and garage are all in the rear setback. Variances are required. There's a large amount of fill dumped on the property. They now gave us paperwork on it saying that it was clean, so I think that we were satisfied with that one. And Putnam County Department of Health approval is required.
Thank you. Rich?
So Mike mentioned the concrete pad that was gonna be removed or noted to be removed. Applicant has provided a soil investigation report estimating the amount of fill should be provided. Based on the report, there are some metals and pesticides exceedances for unrestricted use, but they are below the restricted use soil cleanup objectives for residential use. It's unclear how much fill was brought to the site to accomplish the grading. All fill that be brought to the site must be certified clean, which is why we had the soil investigation report. They must provide a driveway profile and a lighting spill plan. Wait, let me take that back. Applicant did provide a driveway profile. The criteria is the slopes are greater than 15%. At mid-length, it's unclear if this can be corrected or if the driveway is paved, it will need to be paved, but it shouldn't be greater than 15%. So that needs to be corrected. So additional details for that should be provided. I apologize.
So the driveway right now is not in compliance?
It is, yes, according to what was provided for the driveway profile, it's greater than 15%. Per code, it has to get a sign off that anything over greater than 15% needs approval from the town engineer for that. I believe that's what the code says. I believe that's what the code says.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
so anything under 15% would be approved here.
Okay, and Pat?
So just one real comment on this. So if you remember, this is an existing business that's been on that property for a long time. There really is no change that's being proposed. It's legalizing the operation of the site. Rich mentioned it, and I'll defer to Rich, but Paul's summary of the subsurface investigation wasn't clear to me. So there's some metals on the site, as Rich mentioned. There's some pesticides on the site. They've been identified, and it's not clear to me in Paul's summary, but it may be in the report, that it changed to a restricted residential threshold or not. So again, I defer to Rich with that. The reason that's a concern is there's a residence on the property. So if in fact the level of contamination has indicated there should be no contact of those materials, and somebody digs a hole to plant a boxwood in their backyard, we have a problem. So we need to understand that a little better, or perhaps I'm just not understanding the material that was submitted or that Paul summarized. So again, I defer to Rich on that particular issue.
Thank you, Pat.
Paul's gonna have to explain.
Paul's going to ask the town engineer to contact the New York State DEC.
And then the town engineer is gonna go, Paul, you need to contact the New York State DEC and get an answer from them. I know they won't give you anything in writing, but you're gonna have to figure that out and get back to us with the
I've had a
answer.
similar situation over in the town of Southeast, where an applicant's looking to build a baseball field on a project just outside of the village line. And it's been a property that's been dumped on for over 40 years.
Can you speak a little louder? I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry. So at the end of the day, the project's under construction It's for baseball fields for kids to play on. New York City DEP is doing their erosion control inspections, and their one fellow sees, oh, clamshells. This is a contaminated site. Oh, there's some coal ash on the property. This is a contaminated site. So the city made this big deal out of what they saw on the surface. Now, without doing any research, bikeway was being built for the Putnam County. Contractor was building the bikeway was using this site as his yard. So he would excavate whatever he was doing to build this bikeway, materials would be brought onto the site and removed. At the end of the day, we agreed to do soil samples. We did soil samples. There were some spikes, believe it or not, for asphalt-related items because there were millings on the property. So if you get a piece of milling in your soil sample, you're going to get a spike. There were pesticides that came up in the soil tests, which were done at like 8 to 10 feet of depth below grade. And that went back to the old Herbst building, which was a seed and fertilizer, who was on the property from the late 40s until the mid-80s. The City of New York said, well, contact the DEC. So I contacted the DEC. And I got chewed out for about 20 minutes. And the response from the DEC was, well, if the DEP wants to make a complaint, have them make the complaint to us directly. So I told that to the City of New York. You have to make the complaint. If you think there's contamination on this site that warrants some action, you make the complaint. They would not make the complaint. The reason I got what I got from the DEC was that that's historical fill. It's been there for years and years and years, and we're not doing anything. It's staying in place. It's encapsulated. So if I call the DEC and ask them about this property, I'm going to get the same response. So that's why I'm asking if you want to pursue this further, that Rich calls the DEC and Rich has the conversation.
So, Mr. Chairman, interesting anecdote, Paul. This is a little bit different. So the materials on this site that have been identified by your guy, lead,
Yes.
zinc, mercury, aldrin, alpha-chloridane, pesticides, it's not ash. It's a more
Nope.
significant concern. It may be historical. The issue that Paul submitted to us has documentation that tells us the level of that material. The DEC has set standards, what is called restricted residential. If you exceed a certain standard, you can't have people interfacing with that material. So it's a number. The material probably exists in what Paul has submitted to us. Paul's summary of that material just didn't make it clear to a layperson. So a technical person probably can look at that and say, oh, it is below the standard, or it exceeds the standard. If it exceeds the standard, we have an issue because there's a residence on the property. So that's my only point. I can't interpret that data as well as an environmental soil scientist could. So if Rich doesn't have that capability, we should have someone look at it. I don't think we default to DEC because Paul's right. DEC is going to say it's not our job to interpret your property. It is what it is, and you do the testing.
Paul, you only tested the new soil, correct?
We tested that fill section.
So obviously,
There were
it's not,
four-
his-
there were-
obviously, it's not historical fill.
It's historical.
How could it be historical if you just put it there?
It's been there for over 3 years.
That's not-
That makes it historical?
Yes.
I don't know about that.
That's interesting, because it has been there over 3 years, but not much over 3
But I
years.
wouldn't consider that historical.
Yeah.
Somebody else put it there, right?
No. No, not at all.
May I ask a question, Pat?
No,
If it's this label, they've identified the contaminants.
Yep.
And they've labeled them as, use the phrase restricted,
They
restricted
provided the
residential.
levels of each of those
Okay.
materials.
Do we understand what that label
That's my point.
is?
I don't.
Okay, because I guess one question I have is whether, it doesn't sound like it's a prohibition of a residence on the property. It sounds like there is some restriction as to what you can
Right.
do.
That's
And
exactly
I'm
right.
wondering if we can fashion the site plan with labeling about, with conditions about what you can do with that area that would satisfy the environmental
The way the
concerns.
DEC would be involved in this, if Paul now, because of the levels, has to do something on the site, theoretically, the DEC will supervise the work that's being done to ensure that it's being done properly. So they have a role to supervise work that's being done to remediate an environmental contamination.
But it doesn't sound like it's going to be remediated.
Don't
It
know.
sounds.
So Paul- Yeah,
it's-
Paul's saying it's in the ground, I don't want to touch it.
No,
To my eye, it sounds like, don't touch it, don't.
And that may be
Yeah,
the right
yeah.
answer, by the way. I just don't.
But it could be like asbestos, where you can touch it if you do it the right way. You know, we don't know what the thing is, and that's what I think Rich is asking
Or
to get the
like
information
asbestos
on.
also, Mike, that maybe you don't want to touch it because it's encapsulated.
That's
So
correct.
it goes both ways.
But you can if you have to. There's just certain ways you have to do and precautions you have to take.
The soil, actually, maybe Pat can answer this. What, the soil sample that was taken? came
There were
back-
many.
I'm sorry?
There were many.
And they've came back with certain levels?
Yes.
Of lead and acetone and whatnot. Now, does that also go on to say it exceeds the Board of Health limits? Or is it under the board?
Paul's summary says they don't.
They don't exceed?
When you look at the numbers, it raised questions to my non-technical eyes. So that's simply why I'm asking the question. Paul can come back and say, I didn't explain it right. Here's the data presented better. So there's an opportunity for Paul to do that for us.
Well, is
So
it
I
the
would like to
date?
s-
Is
I
it,
would like to see the results.
You may have the full testing
But
protocol.
I'd also like to now see them compared
Yeah.
to what the New York State Board of Health guidelines are. And it's very simple. Do they exceed those limits, or do they not exceed the limits?
Paul, you
We
did
can't
provide
make a
that in your
decision until we
summary.
know that.
Yes. Yeah, like, you know, just for argument's sake, for mercury, for like unrestricted use cleanup, you're allowed point, or 0.18 parts per million. The property had 0.22 parts per million. So it's just.
It exceeded.
It's just for unrestricted. Now, when you look at,
but can I
use-
stop, can I stop you there? When you say unrestricted, that's the lower level. The level they came back with is
That-
something that's called restricted, right?
that is virgin property. Virgin land has never
I understand,
been.
but the way it came back with a label, and the label is restricted. What I think we're suffering through here is we do not understand what that label, the consequences of that label are.
What are the restrictions?
But
Okay.
the labels are defined by the state. So unrestricted is a label like they make every other label that they make when it comes to wastewater discharges. Somewhere they pull out of the sky, or sometimes they actually do math to get there. In this case, they've done math to get there, and it's unrestricted use. They have a level you have to get to. Then they tier it for different things,
I get
right? Where
that.
you have
I
to
get
do
that.
full remediation. We are in between. There's a restricted use for residential and unrestricted. I don't know what the other levels are because I don't have them on the top of my head. So, but the criterion or the criteria are given by the state. So there's a value associated with
I
mercury.
understand the math got us there, but what I think there is confusion about is, once we're there, the math has said we're in this mid-tier. What is the consequence of being in this mid-tier? What are the restrictions? Are there any restrictions? Can you do what their site plan is proposing to do? It seems somewhat simple to me in the sense that when somebody creates a mid-tier category and labels it, there has to be some listing somewhere about what you can do or not do in that tier.
My understanding, and I will verify this, is that for cleanup objective for residential, if you had a high level, you would want to be getting down to 0.81 parts per million. And for that mercury, we're at 0.22. So we're already under the level that you would be trying to clean up to hit.
I get that we're below the level of
That's-
cleanup, but we're in some restriction. We don't know what the restriction is.
I will contact the DEC and ask for some clarification on their definitions and how they,
Do I have it right? Yeah.
Yeah, Anthony said the same thing.
If you would.
I will reach out.
So we have the fill that was brought on site 3+ years ago, right?
Well, it's probably been brought on for the last 30 years plus,
Then
and
we
it's
have-
just built up.
Then we have the other property with the pesticides, the chemicals that Pat had mentioned. Those are really two separate areas, right?
And just to be clear, the fill that's been brought on the site for 30 years has been brought on by the applicant. So this isn't, the.
Correct, as part of his
applicant doesn't have
business.
Clean hands with respect to the
Right.
potential of contamination on his property. He's done it to himself.
That's what distinguishes this from what you were saying before regarding the county of Putnam using a staging area in the town of Southeast. This is completely different.
Yes.
The applicant brought this to his own site and should bear responsibility for that.
Ownership, as far as the New York State DEC is concerned, ownership doesn't matter. They don't care.
Well, it may matter to the board.
Yes, but in terms of how the DEC looks at things, they don't make judgments one way or the other, whether you did it to yourself or somebody did it to you. it
Right, but the
does
town
not
of
weigh
Southeast
in.
Planning Board may look at that differently because you had no control over that, whereas
Yeah, I
here-
understand. Yeah, here it's self-inflicted.
We've also mentioned in the past a concrete slab. Has that been removed? It
I do
said-
not know.
the
I
notes
have not-
say
I have
it's
not
gonna
been
be
out there.
removed. So can you update us on that when you
I
come
will
back
update you
also?
on that.
How big of an area are we talking about with this fill?
Maybe 1,000 square feet, 1,500 at most, I think.
What about the depth? Do you have an idea of the,
I would say an average is probably 4.5 feet.
to zero?
Yeah, well, no, 0 to, like, say, 7. You know, maybe it's a 4-foot average. You know, so I can ballpark a quantity for you, because I don't have any maps that give me topography prior to when the fill was brought in. So it would just be a guess based on, you know, what our test data got from the holes we took. So it would just, yeah.
I think you're hearing the board's concerns about the contamination. This also drains into Wixon Pond, right? I mean,
Yes.
this house
It's up, yeah.
sits right up on top of Wixon Pond Lake. So I think we have some added concern because it drains into a lake. Is there a reason for the ECB to review this because of that?
I don't think it's in their wheelhouse necessarily, or they take technical capabilities.
It's not in their purview to do that. They're not in the wetland, they're not in the buffer, it's not
I don't
trees.
think they offer any additional expertise.
So Paul, I think we want you to come back with some clarity,
Yes.
some facts, some data. None of us feel comfortable going forward right now with this property with contamination on it.
Okay.
Hey, Paul, one final, proximity to the well, I mean, it's a red.
Over 100 feet. It's about 100 feet.
I mean, is that a concern for you, or?
No, I don't live there. No, that would be a question that the Department of Health has to have. I don't have that answer. It's a good question. I don't know how so when you're looking at how the water does subsurface, how it moves, if it's upstream, typically the well would be upstream and this would be downstream, so you should be fine. If the well is closer to the road and the contamination is further up, it might have a possibility to contaminate a well.
And
It
perhaps
really-
the depth of the well also will be affected?
that would also impact it, but again, it depends on how the subsurface flow, you know, how you see rain
Yep.
going down a drain, water does the same thing underground, so.
There-
So Paul, not unlike the previous applicant, this gives us an opportunity to clean up the site, to clean up the contamination from the site, and we need to do it now. You certainly brought it forward, and at the end of the day, we'll have a better location there. All right, we'll see you back here.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good night, guys.
Good night, Paul. Next on the agenda is Diamond Point Development, 4 Baldwin Place Road. Mike?
Yeah, my comments are basically the same as last time. The only question was the 120,000 square foot storage building. If that was moved down a little bit, would that make it less massive, I guess, looking up on top of the hill?
No, I think, you know, the closer we bring it, you're going to see the size of it more. It's going to appear closer to you. To your comment about, we had read about the potential for bringing it forward.
Adam, could you speak a little louder, please?
Yep, sorry. The building is cited for a variety of reasons. Probably foremost among them are the cut and fill relationship. We also have stormwater and other things that we need to do downhill. We have certain requirements for driveways. Certainly, you know, we'll take a look and see if there's a way we can, you know, nudge it a little further forward, you know, to your comment.
Yeah, we're just
I don't think that it does really anything. By bringing it closer, I don't think it makes it less
Okay, it's
imposing,
just,
but
if you're on 6 and you see this hill and then it's up on top of it, I wasn't sure if that was gonna make it look massive. But good job with the barn look, it looks really good in my opinion. I don't know how the board feels, but it looks really nice, so.
Great. Yeah, we'll take a look at that, Mike.
Rich?
So as kind of Mike said, they haven't addressed any of the prior comments. The applicant's here. They just want to discuss the updated drawings and renderings with the board, and will provide responses to the planning board consultant's comments in future submittals.
Okay, and Pat?
So I just want to echo Mike. I think the applicant should be commended on the work they've done with the architecture of the building. And that's been done in conjunction with your architectural consultant. So good work on the part of everybody. As you see the rendering in front of you, they really took to heart your suggestion to make it more farm-like or barn-like. You noted in my memo, I just offered one suggestion, which is a suggestion, not a recommendation, which is that if you notice the central peak of the roof is a standard gable, and there's two little gables on the end. When I think of a barn, I think of a gambrel, which is the barn peak, not a typical peak. So I'm just offering that as a suggestion. It's not a recommendation. Take it for whatever it's worth. But to me, that is more barn-like than the typical peaked roof. The other element the applicant did was clarified our question about the market viability of the project. If you remember, when they were before us at the last meeting, the project had been reduced significantly. And sort of in summary, we said, did you guys get the market wrong? Why did you reduce the size? Normally don't see projects shrinking. We see them getting bigger oftentimes. So the question was, tell us about the market. They've submitted data regarding the market. There's 3 competitive facilities in this market that they would compete with. There's a formula from the industry about square footage per capita. And at the moment, this market is substantially underserved. So with the addition of this, there's still, they've demonstrated that there's still adequate market capacity to accept and absorb the building that's been proposed before you today. So good job in addressing that element as well. So really tonight is your job to put on your architectural review hat and take a look at the renderings.
Thanks, Pat. I'd like to open it up to the board.
So I also appreciated the work on the architecture. I know I gave you grief the last time. The remaining question I have or concern is, so all the beneficial work on the architecture is on that front face. There are 4 sides to the building. Question is, from Route 6 and from Baldwin Place Road, what will I see? Will I always see just that fascia, or will I see what I'll call the unfinished sides as well?
I think, as was mentioned, the applicants and their architectural team have worked pretty tirelessly over the last few weeks with John Anastasio in redeveloping these architectural plans. As far as what you're going to see from Route 6 and from Baldwin Place Road, we have a couple of renderings, and I'll flip this over. I'll show you another one. One of John's comments, obviously, the primary focus is on the front of the building, because that's going to be the main thing that you are, in fact, going to see from Route 6, from Baldwin Place Road, from most of the vantage points outside of the site. One of John's comments, I recall being looking more at the outside corners, the dimensionality of the new facade. In other words, it's not just a flat facade that just looks like something from one direction. Mm-hmm. There's a dimension to it. There's a depth to it. And I think that kind of addresses your concern about, well, what if we see it from other angles?
It's not the front facade that I'm asking about. It's the what's probably the right side.
Well, but while we're talking about,
It's this stuff.
Yeah.
yeah. But Bob, you bring a point, as we're talking about what's it going to look like. I mean, we're going to be stopped at a traffic light on Route 6. also
On Route
looking
6.
As well as Baldwin.
Both, yeah.
There's your Route 6 view.
Oh, there you go.
So as I was mentioning, you can, this is from Route 6. You can see it on angle. And by looking at it on angle, you can see the articulation and the depth that they've designed into the facade. Again, this is not just a flat face where when you look at it from an angle, you're just going to see, a raw side of the building. There's some depth and articulation to the facade that projects out from the building.
Adam, can you just show the side elevation? I think that's Bob's point. So the other drawing that shows the side elevation, displays Bob's concern quite accurately. So there's the front facade, and that's the side of the building. So it's a stage front attached to a
I
typical
get that, I
industrial
get that.
building.
I'm questioning
That side.
from the roads,
Yeah.
from the two
How much will
roads
you
there,
see of the
will I
side?
see, is it just that front facade that I'm going to see, or am I going to see those other elements as well?
Well, the only thing I can add to this is that this is wetlands to the right of the office, and it's pretty substantial. So from that vantage point, if those wetlands weren't there, you would be able to see the side of it from Route 6. With the wetlands there, I don't think you're going to be able to see that side of it at all, 0% of the side from that.
Because if you paint that, the red,
I think
like
that
the
would-
front, that could make all the difference, and then just put one of those X's on there with a fake door on the side I'm talking about, where you're talking about seeing.
Yeah.
That could dress it up enough that you don't have to do another front, but it'll give it that red dimension that it looks
We're
like the
certainly
rest of it.
happy to do
That
that.
may be something
That
someone
would
will
be,
have to
that
do.
would be helpful.
Okay, happy to do that.
You won't see that total contrast.
Exactly.
Of red to almost white, and it's,
Okay.
Good point.
If there are any other comments, obviously, given that, we've made a pretty big departure from what was originally designed with the building. We do, as was mentioned, we do owe responses to some more technical comments. We'll certainly look to address those, almost complete, or as completely as possible with our next submission. So we would ask the board if you would consider scheduling a public hearing for the next meeting so we can continue to move this forward now that it seems like we're in a pretty good place with the site and with the architectural design.
One question.
I have a question.
Okay. I did read somewhere, it was an architect's comment. Have you given the architect samples of the materials, or?
I'm not sure.
He hasn't, I think he's had a color board. I believe that's what he asked for. I didn't know that he asked for samples of the
Maybe
material.
I was,
I know he asked for a color board
Okay.
specifically, and that we did
Maybe
send to
that's
him.
what it was, I
I
read.
think that's what it was.
I'll talk to him, see if he wants to see materials.
okay. Or even, I mean, if you were so inclined, I mean, it might help us as a board to see the materials and the colors.
We'd be happy to bring something to a meeting, for sure.
at least
Yeah,
for
no
the public
problem.
hearing, that's a good
Yeah,
idea for the
that's a
public
good idea
hearing.
for the public hearing.
Show
That's a good
people the
idea.
colors.
Yeah. So just to clarify, so both ends, you'll be able to make the same color as the front?
Yeah,
Yes.
and we can make that change for the next meeting.
Yeah.
Personally, I'd like to commend you. I think you took what the board was looking to, you did a great job.
Thank you.
putting it, So thank you very much for that. Anyway, the rendition showing, it looks like a nice view, as we see it right there. But I do like what Pat said about that center section of that roof being a gambrel roof. I think that would really solidify it, tie it in, to give it a true, I mean, the barn doors look great on the ends and everything. So I do like Pat's suggestion for that center peak. And then the other question I have, and this is a little bit of a question / observation, is the cupola looks a little small for the building. I don't know if that's just the way it is in the rendering, but I would like to see, I don't know what the scale is. I'd like you to look at that, and I think it could be a little bit larger.
We will. We'll look at that.
Yeah.
Talk to the architect about that.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
We were thinking sheep, but chickens would work too.
Goats outside, fence in the front.
Did a great job with this so far.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's really done a good job.
You guys still have some technical answers to give us, right?
Yeah, we owe you some information about parking projections and lighting, things like that. And like I said, we want to substantively address those with our next submission.
And Mr. Chairman, all I would add is typically we would have most of that material prior to scheduling a public hearing, so it's up to you and how you choose to do that. And plus, they've got other agencies to talk to as well.
I actually am okay, since it's been around for a while, and they've done their due diligence, to take a little bit of a risk here, knowing that Rich will catch you if you don't. I would never approve something that's got 5 pages of comments from Rich.
Of course.
I'd like you to work with Rich. I'd like to push this to a public hearing, because I'd like to hear from the public, but I will not go any further than that until you're satisfied with Rich. and his comments, and Mike and Pat and the board as well.
Absolutely.
So Pat, I'd like to do things in parallel here. I think the applicant has earned it by working with us, but I don't want to short step.
That's fine, the applicant has demonstrated their sincerity in
Yeah.
advancing the application, so I'm sure we can schedule the public hearing and you can continue to work with us offline, so we can
Yeah,
address
that,
those issues.
yep, absolutely.
Rich, you okay with that?
If that's what the board wants, yes, I'm okay with it.
Okay, but then we'll make sure that we're in sync, and I will speak to you prior to the meeting, and if they're not ready to go any further, they won't go
I
any
was just
further.
going to say that, Mr. Chairman, if they don't, we cancel the public
Right.
hearing.
And then the next time, we don't do this.
Did we do a neg deck? Have they been to the DEP? I guess that's the biggest hurdle you're gonna have now. So don't we have to do a neg deck to get them to the
Yeah.
DEP? We did. So I think you're bigger, so, Mr. Chairman, you do what we want, public hearing is fine. They still need to meet with the bigger agency here, not that we're not a big agency. They got the DOT, they got the DEC, but they got the DEP, and that's gonna be the one that's probably gonna take the longest, though I know Insight knows what they're doing when it comes to that. I think the question is, have we done an egg deck? Do we get there and get them in front of the DEP sooner than later? So to help along with the process. So again, you were asking for the parallel process. That's not what Adam is asking for, but it needs to be done by this board.
Yeah,
and then-
short of an approval resolution at the next meeting, if we could do the public hearing and have a neg deck prepared, that would help us facilitate moving forward with DEP and outside agencies.
But once we have the public hearing, you only have 45 days to act.
Unless you keep the public hearing open. So we just have to manage. We just have to manage this, Mr. Chairman, so but we're doing this a little bit different, so it just requires us to cooperatively manage the process.
I like the board to be a little agile on this project, because I think it deserves it. It's as we mentioned, it's a gateway into a community. I do want to hear from the public, but I know we're going to hear from them sooner or later anyway. I think it shows good faith from the board here if we try to do a couple things in parallel. It comes back to us either way, like you said. So Pat, what kind of motions do we need? If this is okay with the board, by the way. Anthony, you okay with this?
You're just scheduling public hearings.
Okay.
Do we have to make a motion to prepare a negative declaration?
If you're ready to do that, so,
Can we do that after the public hearing?
so if you're now ready to direct the preparation of the negative declaration, which I was not
I'm not
thinking.
sure I'm ready for that with 5 pages.
Yeah, nor am I. So what I would
I'm
suggest
okay
is
with the public
have the
hearing. I'm not
public
okay
hearing.
with it, yeah.
If the public hearing goes well, we can then move to the
That's-
neg deck, and we just have to perhaps keep the public hearing
Let's keep
open
the
while we do
public
that.
hearing
That's my thing. I don't want to prepare the neg deck
I
with
think
5
that's
pages of comments from
one
Rich.
step ahead of where we need to be
Yeah,
at the moment.
I think we're doing our part by speeding up the public hearing a little bit, getting the input. Maybe at the public hearing meeting, we can do the neg deck. Ask you to prepare.
We'll see how that.
So right now, it's just a motion for a public hearing.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to schedule a public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Rich, we'll communicate up like we do before they come back again.
I have nothing to do here every day anyway. I'll just focus on the next 2 weeks. Don't worry about it. Hey, I already agreed that this is going forward. Now I can fight that.
You'll have all of your elevations we've done for the public hearings. They're gonna wanna see that stuff.
Next on the agenda for a subdivision is Union Energy Center LLC, 24 Miller Road, sketch plan.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to do these together because they are for the same project?
Yeah, I mean, there's a site plan for Union Energy LLC, 24 Miller Road, site plan, and we also have the sketch events. So we can do them together. We'll start with the site plan, actually. That's the fifth on the agenda.
Well, start with the subdivision, Mr. Chairman, because that's easiest.
Huh,
We can dispense with our comments on that one easier.
Mike?
Yep.
The applicant proposes to divide and merge a portion of this parcel with the NICEAG parcel to the north, 86A285. That's a little substation up on Union Valley Road. Add a 116 megawatt battery energy storage system off Miller Road in Mahopac. This is a permitted use in the CBP zoning district. There is a submission for a subdivision submitted simultaneously with the application so that it's site plan and subdivision at the same time. The subdivision has to happen first, so make sure as we're voting at the end, we have to do them in that order. There are wetlands on much of the parcel. ECB, DEP, and DEC all need to put their input on this application. And lot lines on this plat are going to be changing. I spoke to the current owner, and there are some, I guess, additional changes that are going to be made, so I didn't do any tabular checks yet, because I know all the numbers are going to change, but I don't know what yet exactly.
Okay, thank you. And Rich, you got some comments?
So there's a duel going on here for the lot line. The engineering department doesn't have any comments to it, but there is going to be changes to that, as Mike mentioned, for the subdivision or the sketch plan. Referrals to the DEC, the DOT, the DEP, Department of Highways of County, DOH, GML, Department of Planning, possibly the Highway Department, ECB, Mahopac Fire Department. Permits would be needed for stormwater and wetlands, DEP, possibly definitely for stormwater, but I don't know about subsurface treatment. I don't know if there's any kind of facilities going to be put on there. DOH, if there's going to be a well and septic, and ECB for wetlands. You need to have a stormwater pollution prevention plan, stormwater maintenance agreements, performance bond engineering fees, and then there's a bunch of detailed comments that need to be looked at, but I think the board, they're just trying to find out dipping their toe in the water right now, so Adam knows how to address those comments.
Thank you. Pat?
So, as you're hearing, this is two actions. It's for the construction of a battery storage facility. It also involves the installation of substations to distribute the energy that's stored in those batteries. So that's what this is about. This is the first time we're seeing one of these in our town. So Mike has done the first piece of this, which is he's researched this and he's considered this a permissible use in this zoning district. So hurdle number one has been achieved. The second issue relates to zoning compliance issues. So Mike and I haven't talked about this, but the battery units themselves meet the setback requirements in this zone. The two substations, however, I don't know how you define that. So if you look at the map, the edge of the fence around one of the substations encroaches into the side yard setback. That's not a structure. Is it the fence? Is it the electrical equipment inside the substation that you would measure a setback from? I'm not sure. We have to learn more about it. So the primary set of comments I have is learning more about this facility this evening. So zoning compliance and the subdivision, fully compliant. So we have no issues with the creation of the subdivision. The site plan itself, most of the comments just are explaining what this is all about. So a few things, I mentioned the zoning compliance. This is a facility that presumably would be accessed for maintenance. So how often does that occur? What's involved in the maintenance? Is it a guy in a pickup truck? Is it 50 guys and they come there every day? There's no off-street parking that's provided. If it's a bunch of vehicles frequently, there should be parking for those vehicles so it's not obstructing emergency access to these facilities. One of the sort of anecdotal concerns about battery storage is safety and fire hazards. So they've submitted a report documenting some of that information, but still our fire department should, it's the first one, so they should be involved in the review of this and they should be comfortable that their ability to access the site and to fight a fire is unencumbered in any way. So that relates to the driveway, its configuration. It's a gravel driveway. There's some grades. Perhaps the fire department wants to pave it. I don't know. And it all will relate to the equipment the fire department has that's specific to fighting an electrical fire. So the fire department plays a big role with respect to this. A question just about, again, how this works. So there's electricity and a bunch of batteries. How is that distributed to the grid? How do they make money out of this? It's not a public utility, it's a private company, so how does that operation work? So hopefully they can explain that to us a little bit better. The driveway that Rich mentioned, There's some landscaping on there, Adam, you just need to give us details about that. The primary issue with respect to the installation of this is the site's a giant wetland. So there's really only one high and dry area, which is where they're putting the battery storage, but the rest of the site is highly constrained by wetlands. They're state-regulated wetlands. There are encroachments. They have to make crossings, so they have to talk to DEC early. Again, I don't know if DEC has any particular concerns about the proximity of a battery storage facility in the midst of a fairly substantial wetland area. So we do need to hear from DEC with respect to that. The trailway's right next door, so the visibility of this, these are basically shipping containers that have batteries in them. So that potentially could be a less than attractive aesthetic feature. So what do they look like? Is it screened? Can you see it from the trailway? So some work on, Adam, what we can see from the trailway over there. There is a new driveway, so getting sight distance, the typical stuff you do for a new driveway. Lighting, is there lighting that's proposed for these facilities? It's a question, don't know. And finally, decommissioning, just like our cell facilities, when the batteries run out, and the batteries and the flashlight goes dark, what happens, who decommissions it, what's involved in doing that? So a decommissioning plan should be submitted with this, that would be part of the application. As Rich mentioned, a bunch of other agencies are involved in this. And this would also, it's an unlisted action with respect to seeker, so tonight designate your intent to be lead agency, and we can start the seeker process as well.
So Joe, to Pat's point, I guess it's a Joe question. So I had a thought similar to what Pat just mentioned.
So before you ask the question,
you're
I've recused myself with respect to this matter. If the board does need legal counsel, the town will provide other counsel for that.
Yes.
Apologize.
Thanks for reminding me, Joe. So Pat, in the decommissioning, I thought Joe was being a little too quiet there tonight. I'm gonna give him a layup there. So we make sure we get the decommission. 20 years from now they leave, we just make sure it's bonded properly, correct?
Typically, it's bonding, so that if they blow it off, we have the resources to remove it, and it's how it gets removed. So again, these are materials that require special handling.
Okay. Let me open it up to the.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, we talked about our fire department, since it's on the border of Somers. Somers Fire Department should probably be advised of this also, or any of the local Westchester one. I don't know if Yorktown, but maybe our fire department would refer it to them. I don't know that, but that's something that should be brought there. And again, Pat mentioned that this is amidst, a lot of wetlands. They're putting in stormwater features and treatment systems in there. It's going to go through the rigorous review of the DEP with that, so.
Excellent point, Rich. I think if I was a neighboring community, I'd want to know about it.
Yeah, we have mutual aid agreements with
Sure.
our fire departments.
Would we want to even, because I mean, looking at it, it's literally on the line.
Yeah.
Would we want to refer or
So we
notify the planning
automatically
board?
pay if we have a referral to Somers.
Okay. Yeah.
So I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
I was going to ask this to both Joe and to Pat, but I guess Joe escapes.
The night that Joe gets a few.
Yeah, so Pat, you're it. I recognize that under our current zoning laws, this is a permissible use. But I did go back to our draft comprehensive plan, and the draft comprehensive plan distinguishes between Tier 1 and Tier 2. Anything that's over 600 kilowatts is Tier 2, and that's prohibited, would be prohibited anywhere in the town. This is 116 megawatts, so substantial difference. Should that affect how we think about this?
You should bear that in mind. It's not local law yet, so they're not bound by it at the moment. They have submitted an application. How we deal with grandfathering applications is yet to be determined, I don't believe, with respect to the comprehensive plan. But you can't hold them to a standard that's not
Okay.
local law.
So then, second,
By the way, the local law reflects the NYSERDA law ordinance.
Okay.
So we know what it's all about.
so the second question I have deals with the fire risk. It was alluded to in the materials that were presented. There were three towns, town of East Hampton, Town of Warwick, and Town of Lyme all had fires in their facilities this past summer. One on May 31st, one on June 26th, and one on July 27th. And my understanding is that this has now been referred to a newly formed task force that the governor has set up to determine the cause of the root cause and how to deal with it. In all those fires, I think the East Hampton fire, if I am correct, was a 5-megawatt facility. The town of Warwick was a 12-megawatt facility. I'm not sure what the town of Lyme was. Although with the town of Lyme, I believe when the fire was declared, surrounding residents were told shelter in place, meaning don't come out and breathe the air. So it sounds like the fire risk of these facilities is still in motion in terms of figuring it out. This is 116 megawatts, so it's substantially larger than the facilities that have had these issues. How do you respond to that?
Right, so we have provided a detailed fire safety analysis and plan that'll go with the site. The applicant is working with a fire safety consultant. They have, my understanding, is already reached out and connected with the local volunteer fire department, and is also going to be offering specific training for these safety procedures and how to deal with fires of this nature, related to these battery storage facilities. I don't know if Scott, if you want to expand on that, or?
Yeah, it was part of my 5 minutes.
You would, Scott, you need to go up to the microphone.
Introduce yourself.
Introduce yourself and.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Scott Connick. I'm a senior project developer with East Point Energy. I can address the fire part first, or I can save it for my overview as well.
I just heard you mention the 5-minute overview. That might save a lot of questions from the board if you don't mind giving it now.
Yeah. So thank you for your time. My colleague Tyler Klein is going to share a brief PowerPoint that gives an overview of the project. I'm not going to walk through all of this, but just it's for your reference there, and it doesn't introduce any new information. I work for East Point Energy. We are a grid-scale energy storage project developer, owner, and operator. So these are essentially large batteries that connect to the grid, to utilities, and help them manage electricity. We are a subsidiary of a company called Equinor, which is a Norwegian, historically oil and gas company, but also does a lot of offshore wind, including in New York, and has a really robust history in developing projects and safety. The project itself, as I mentioned, is a 116 megawatt, 4-hour duration battery. Essentially what it does is it charges from the grid, from the New York wholesale market of electricity during periods of low demand, and puts it back on the grid when it's most in need. It's been compared, these types of projects have been compared to the Swiss Army knife for the grid, because they can provide a number of services to utilities, including capacity, energy, and a host of ancillary services like frequency regulation and maintaining the voltage of the grid so that people's equipment are not being harmed.
Scott, is there a way you could put the 116 megawatt into layman's terms? For instance, Giant Stadium uses X amount of megawatts, or is there a way to clarify for all the people that watch us on TV or for the board? Do you have something like that?
Yeah, so
Give them minus 20, give plus or minus 20%.
I can give you a perspective.
Okay.
One World Trade Center, backup generators there are 8 megawatts in total to run one World Trade Center.
So
Okay,
8 megawatts to back up one World Trade Center.
Yeah, correct, on the emergency side.
That's a good perspective. That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
another metric that we use, and every part of the country is a little bit different, but On the hottest day of the year, typically 1 megawatt can generate enough electricity for about 500 homes. Again, it depends if you're in Texas or in Maine, you know, it varies a little bit, but that's a rule of thumb. The project consists of 4 major things. So one are battery enclosures, which are metal structures on a concrete pad where the batteries will be held. That's the main component of the project. There will also be transformers, inverters, and then substations. So one substation for our project, and then one substation to connect to the utility, NYSEG. In our view, this site is uniquely situated for this type of project. And in our view, it is the highest and best use for this site. And I want to highlight a few reasons why, and then I'll jump into the fire safety. So one, we have to be adjacent to electrical infrastructure. This site has the transmission lines that we need. That rules out about 95% of properties where we could feasibly build a project. In addition, it's in a region of critical need. So the lower Hudson Valley and this region has a lot of load. Obviously, New York City is close by. There's a lot of electrical needs. Putnam County, according to some of the research I did ahead of the meeting, has only one grid scale electric generator in the whole county, which is about 2 megawatts in the northeast corner, which again could power, you know, maybe a bit over 1,000 homes at a time. The security of the grid is at risk as a lot of things are changing. There's a lot of vulnerabilities on the system. These sorts of projects help provide a lot of the reliability that is required. You know, and I know in some parts of the Hudson Valley, folks say, you know, when the wind blows, the power goes out. And while these projects are not going to stop every outage that happens, they can reduce the number that come, especially as the grid changes. And part of the reason why we wanted to focus in this area is because of the retirement of Indian Point. There's obviously a much greater need here than in some other locations. We also selected this property because of the zoning. It is a commercial and business park location. The building inspector has told us that this falls under general business or commercial use and fits into the zoning. It's isolated. You know, this property is about 95 acres. We are using a fraction of that property, mostly in the center of the property. So it's isolated from the commercial properties. It's isolated from homes both in Carmel and in Somers, and is mostly going to be out of sight, not heard, out of mind. Another benefit of this site is that it has a large, flat, relatively flat portion of the property, which is obviously not very common in this area. It has minimal impacts to the environment, so we are, as proposed, impacting, I think, about 1/10 of 1 acre of wetland, and should have no impact to cultural resources, contaminated soils, and as long as we cut trees in the winter, you know, no impact to any protected species. This project will help facilitate clean energy throughout, you know, the region and through New York. You know, sun's not always shining, wind is not always blowing. You need this sort of firm electricity to keep the lights on. And it will have, among a number of benefits, you know, a major tax increase for the property. As it pertains to fire, you know, we understand that fire safety is critical. As Adam mentioned, we have had 2 meetings with the Mahopac Fire Department. We actually have a third one tomorrow morning. We are joined by our fire consultant, Brian, with the Fire and Risk Alliance. He's former NYFD and is an expert in this field. And part of our objective is to work out exactly what the fire department needs to make sure that they can respond to any and every problem should that ever happen, and also to get them comfortable with this concept and be able to relay to you that this project is safe. You know, well, I don't want to go too much longer, but we can talk about fire for a while. One thing Tyler also suggested, if at some point the planning board would like to walk the property and visit it and see and feel how isolated it is, we'd be happy to facilitate that. So that, I probably ran over 5 minutes, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks, that was very helpful. Let me open up to the board for any questions.
I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of technical questions and conversations going here. I don't think that now is the time until we get the agency clearances that they have to get to. You know, like I said, we could get pretty technical here. We're going to have quite a few questions on containment and so forth. But I think first we need to focus on our agency approvals before we really go any, you know, before we get any deeper into this.
Really, I think what Pat wanted us to do tonight to that point is declare ourselves as lead agency.
Yep, so we can start that
And
process.
then continue to learn, this is new news for us. I mean, when you mentioned walk the site, I just wrote it down, put a star next to it, you know. I see John shaking his head, right? So this is our time for us to learn, right? Declare ourselves as lead agency. As much work as you can do early on, Adam, I'm not sure if it's appropriate to, we talked about the Somers Fire Department. Is it premature to do that, stay with the Mahopac Fire Department, or maybe reach out to, you know?
I would suggest go through the Mahopac Fire Department to talk to Somers.
Exactly.
I don't know if they like one another, so.
You also mentioned noise. Do you know what kind of noise this generates? Or will that be on the map somewhere?
Yeah, so each battery unit has an air conditioning unit, depending on which system you use. That's what will make the most noise. Fortunately, the property is pretty isolated, and we will comply with the noise ordinance at the property lines.
Scott, can I just ask you one question? So I mentioned it earlier. How does the business model work? So you're producing your energy. Do you control its distribution into the grid? Does NYSEG, who flips the switch? How does that work?
Yeah, so we control when we flip the switch. Essentially, there is a wholesale market for electricity in New York. It's run by the New York Independent Service Operator, or NYSO. NYSO sends price signals to every generator in the state and says, if you generate electricity at this time, in this amount, at this location, you know, you get in this manner, then you get paid this amount. And so what we will do is use price signals from NYSO to charge the battery when there's the least impact on the grid and put it back on the grid when it's really, really needed. And so that they are how we interface financially. And then those costs and those cost savings get passed along to the utilities and then to ratepayers.
So if I'm understanding you, you buy the electricity from NYSEG and then sell it back to them? Different rates, yes.
And not from NYSEG, but from New York ISO, the wholesale market.
But the lines where you're going to be attaching, aren't those NYSEG lines?
Yes, those are.
Okay.
You mentioned Putnam County before, so how does this provide stability for Putnam County? Selfishly asking, just.
Yeah, so, you know, the grid is interconnected, but if there is an outage in a neighboring town, neighboring county, that has the ability to knock out electricity for a wider area. Our project in those cases, assuming that it's charged, which it may not always be the case, can generate that 116 megawatts for 4 hours and help keep the lights on for several hours, giving precious time for utility crews to go out there, resolve the issue, and move on. It's not going to stop every outage, and obviously if you had, you know, a several-day problem with a hurricane, for example, you know, it's not going to completely stop that either.
It's not going to help in the event of a storm.
Correct. If a tree comes down, they took down the wires.
It's a capacity. And we have the luxury of living up here in Putnam, and where New York City's always looking at a brownout. This would enhance that. So it's not, just as a point of fact, it's not going to help in the event of a storm.
So
Where
I'm
power
still,
lines are down or substation
Anthony, and
blows
you
up.
probably know the answer to this better, but, so you are controlling your distribution of electricity into the grid. NYSEG probably has something to say about that. So they may not, because of some condition in their grid, they may not want to accept that energy for some particular point. So do you have to ask permission? Like, how does that work?
So-
It seems odd to me, knowing our relationship with NYSEG, that you all of a sudden now control part of what NYSEG does. NYSEG likes to control a lot of stuff, so I'm just surprised at that. So do you have to ask permission? How does it work?
No, it's an excellent question. So we are doing a series of studies with NYSEG and the New York ISO to make sure that we can interconnect to their facilities. And if there are any parameters about when we can charge or when we cannot charge, those get worked out in those studies. Those studies take typically 4 years or so. And we're a couple years into that, more than halfway through that process.
So conceivably, NYSEG's system isn't of an adequate capacity to accept 113 megawatts. So are you upgrading their system? What could come out of that study that might affect this plan?
Yeah, so
Should we be aware of that? Is that our concern? In other words, NYSEG could come back and say, we can't take, we can only take 90 megawatts. So reduce the size of your facility. That affects the site plan we're looking at.
yeah, so that happens all the time with interconnection studies, and we are at a point in the process where we've cleared several hurdles already, and we think 116 is likely what's going to work. It may get, sometimes they do get reduced in the final study, but we have a lot of engineering reasons to believe that this is about the right size.
So that's reassuring, Scott. So conceivably, when we get to an approval, we would impose a condition that says, you got to do what NYSEG tells you to do, and you could live with something like that. What I'm hearing now is you've done the study, so you're reasonably confident. So could you accept a condition that says you'll live with what NYSEG says?
Yes.
Does NYSEG have a financial interest on top of your financial interest? In other words, you're basically arbitraging the electricity cost on the way into your battery and on the way out of your battery. How does NYSEG make money off of that?
Yeah, so NYSEG is not really interfacing with us from a financial perspective, other than that if there's any upgrades required, we are paying for those upgrades. However, we participate in the New York ISO. Those costs get passed along to the utilities for whatever region. And so if we're helping them save money by buying low and selling high, then that helps them with their ratepayers and helps the locals as well.
How long has East Point Energy been doing projects like this?
Since 2018. However, prior to that, our founders worked in wind and solar, and they did about $1.5 billion worth of wind and solar projects going back, I think, to the early 2000s.
Which I'd like to point out is we prefer a battery system than wind or solar here.
Yeah, that was going to be another question. I mean, is there any plan down the road to introduce in this property solar panels or anything?
We have no plan to do that.
You mentioned the financial impact on the town through taxes. Can you articulate, the before and after?
So we met with the IDA today to have an introductory conversation. The short answer is I don't know precisely how much, but right now the town is getting very little revenue off of the property. This project is very capital intensive. It's going to be north of $150 million of investment in the equipment and structures. So there would be a substantial increase in tax revenue.
I think one of the things along the path here is, we'd like to see the actual numbers.
The numbers of the cost of the project or the
No,
value, the
what
tax
the
revenue?
tax impact, beneficial tax impact for the town.
I thought I saw an estimate of approximately $250,000 annually somewhere. I could be mistaken, but as Bob asked, let's firm it up a little bit. Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, we need a motion to declare ourselves lead agency. Rich?
They mentioned that they do training for the local fire departments. I think the board should just consider that training has to be either annually or ad infinitum, because volunteer fire departments rotate their personnel, right? So they may not be working there. People retire, people move on. So what kind of assurances will this be provided that training will be there? And I guess ultimately, we're talking about this report with NYSEG. I think a copy of that report, once it's completed, if it's allowed to be given to us, I don't know if it's going to be confidential or not, but if it should be given to the town as part of our records for this whole thing, so.
So I think we probably can eventually provide that. It is very technical, but we can do that. On the firefighter training, generally our request is that we defer to the fire department on the cadence that they want training done. In addition, we usually film the training as we do it so that the fire department can refer back to it at any time that they want.
And what happens, so for example, if, I mentioned that governor's task force, who knows how long it'll take. Just hypothetically, let's assume this project gets approved next year, you go build it, and then 2 years from now, the governor's task force says, well, we have to do X, Y, and Z. The building standards have to change. The fire equipment necessary to fight fires has to be such and such, and the training has to consist of such and such. So how do we deal with that ongoing shift in circumstances?
Yeah, so I think, one, this project is not about to be built. We still have that last study to do, and it is very slow. I would check with Brian, but I expect that the task force will be done before we're buying equipment. Or do you think it's going to take more than 18 months?
Please use the microphone and introduce yourself.
Evening, guys. Brian Fink. I work for Fire and Risk Alliance. I retired from the New York City Fire Department last year as a battalion chief in the Bronx. I've been working on these systems since I retired. I was involved in training in the New York City Fire Department as well, and a big part of that was dealing with batteries. As far as the governor's task force, I don't have any inside info in that. I did speak to the agency who's running that task force, and right now, I don't think they really know what they want to do. I think they're kind of lost. They don't have a lot of expertise in this. It's a fairly new field. I think from a firefighting point of view, what we're finding and what I recommend to fire departments, and I've been around the country teaching a lot of different fire departments, is most times it's better not to do anything. Do not put water on them. You can't extinguish them easily. If you do extinguish them and you leave any kind of residual charge in the battery, that's where you get reignition. So you're far better off just letting that one container burn, get rid of its contents, and it's the safest outcome. Fire department doesn't put anybody at risk. There is off-gassing involved with these units, but all the test results that I've seen from the UL studies, from studies that we've conducted ourselves in our own labs, we've burnt these large containers full of batteries and recorded the gases that are emitted from these things. And it's roughly the same as a car fire. Electric car fire is probably more similar, but any car fire emits a tremendous amount of gases that you don't want to be breathing. But these particular gases that come off these units that I've seen, they dissipate very quickly. They're all lighter than air. The number one gas that comes out of these things is hydrogen. It's lighter than air, it dissipates quickly. Carbon monoxide is the other one, carbon dioxide is the other. Those are the three main gases that off-gas when they have fires in these things. So the bottom line is, for the fire department to put water on one of these things, one, it's very difficult to put out the fires because when they go into thermal runaway, the pressures coming out of those batteries are over 100 PSI, so you can't get any kind of extinguishing agency into the cell to put it out. The batteries that they think they have extinguished, it's because the state of charge in a battery, if it's at 100% state of charge, that's the fuel in the battery. As it starts to off gas, it's losing state of charge and it's losing gas, basically. It's losing fuel. So when it gets down to 20, 30% state of charge, then maybe you can extinguish these. But the problem being, again, once you leave a battery with any kind of state of charge in it, it can reignite, and that's where you hear about them. They tow these cars away that have been on fire, they put them in the yard, they reignite on them. You guys saw the fire down in Lower Manhattan about 4 months ago, right? We lost 4 people I think about 17 injured on the floors above, right? They brought the batteries out to the street, put them in an overpack drum. They still had a state of charge left in them. They put them in an overpack drum, and this is what I'm going to talk to the fire department too about tomorrow. I'm going to take them through some initial training tomorrow, and I'll do it for any fire department up here who's interested in going through it. I'll do it for you guys if you want it. That when they put them in the overpack drum, that doesn't stop them from going into thermal runaway or continuing in thermal runaway. The gases keep coming off. The gas is built up inside of that overpack drum, and it exploded in the street. So there's a lot of products out there. The fire department will be told, oh, yeah, you can use this stuff. They shouldn't be doing that. Let it burn out, get rid of the state of charge, and it's your safest option. It's a little annoying because it's a long-duration fire. Typically, it'll burn actively for 8 to 10 hours, and it'll off-gas for maybe 36 hours. But again, the gas is coming off this thing. If you had a Home Depot burning next to your house, it's far worse than anything you're going to get out of one of these things. I can show you pictures of what it looks like. We lit one on fire ourselves. We caused it to go into thermal runaway and burn the entire container. It looks like a dumpster fire, basically. It's just a long-duration dumpster fire.
What causes them to have this thermal runaway to begin with?
You know, there's 3 main causes, and these systems are pretty good in that it prevents some of that. So we'll talk about scooters. Let's talk about those first. And e-bikes, right? So physical damage can cause them to go into thermal runaway. So you think about a scooter or a bike banging around the streets, they're jumping curbs with them, stuff. It damages the separator plate inside the cells. Once that happens, it can allow the cell to go into thermal runaway. Once one cell does, it spreads to the next cell. That's one way, physical damage. Thermal conditions, right? You leave these bikes sitting on a hot sidewalk, that can happen. These containers, they have air conditioning units, keeps that from happening, right? Some of the other things that can happen, there are sometimes a problem with the way a battery was manufactured, and that can be an issue. I believe the one out in East Hampton, that may have been what happened at that. I went out there to take a look at that. It's still in the underlying stages on that. But
Where are they disposing of these batteries? So when we see in the news in the morning, fire in a building caused by the bikes or the scooters in the bottom floor, when the fire department comes in, where are these batteries going?
so it depends on the state of charge left in the battery. If there's no state of charge left in the battery, basically they're just garbage. There's no hazard left in them. If they have a state of charge left in them, then they have to get a recycler to come in and take those batteries and deal with them. Typically, they can get rid of the state of charge. They can draw it off after the fact. Once the state of charge is out of there, they're no longer a hazard.
But isn't there still certain elements in it, cobalt, manganese?
Yeah, you know what, there's a few different chemistries of these batteries, and these systems are kind of moving away from the NMCs, the nickel, manganese, cobalt batteries. They're the ones where you see where they get punctured or damaged and they start spitting out fire. The newer ones, the LFPs, they're lithium phosphate, ferrous, lithium phosphate, iron phosphate batteries. They will off-gas. They do not shoot out fireballs. They don't do that. It's a very different chemistry. So when they off-gas, don't get it wrong, the gas is still very flammable. Again, it's hydrogen. Hydrogen has a huge flammability range from 4% up to 76%. That's the danger with these things, is the gas when it's in a closed container. And these systems are designed where either they have a ventilation system to keep it below the or the lower explosion range, or they have deflagration panels built into the containers that allow, if it does ignite, it will allow the container, usually on the roof, to blow off rather than directing the force out the doors at the firefighters.
If we lose power, is there alternate power to keep their air conditioners going?
These things are regulated by NFPA 855 and the New York State Fire Code as well. And they have to have backup power to supply those systems, yes.
But it's not the power that they're charging, okay, good.
No, no, it's a separate system.
Mike, would you
Yeah.
ask me about the trailer or the container and the air conditioner? Does that have back, is that's,
That's what has the backup power, because it has to keep it cool,
Right.
even if the power goes out. That's why I was asking the question.
Well, that's to keep
That's-
them in the
that's
range to be able to charge and discharge correctly. Like if one of these goes into thermal runaway, that shuts down, that's no longer.
no, I just wanted clarity, because I wasn't sure if, I thought Mike had a good question, I wasn't sure this was a question. If the power to the air conditioning units goes out,
Yes.
you have generated backup to get that air conditioning back up and running?
That would keep the air conditioner running, correct.
Okay.
Correct. But if they were to lose power and there was no backup power for whatever reason, those units basically isolate themselves and stop charging or discharging.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Because that's when the heat happens, when they're either charging or discharging, correct?
Typically,
Like
yes.
your cell phone gets hot when
Yeah,
you're
and
overusing
that's
it.
correct, and when you're on an airplane, when they tell you not to move your seat if you drop your phone in it? The reason being is because if you move your seat and you crush your phone, that's that physical damage that sends your cell phone into thermal runaway, and you can have a fire on the plane. So it's the same with any of this technology. Lithium-ion batteries they can go into thermal runaway because of damage, physical damage to them.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And again, if you guys want a more in-depth education on it, feel free to ask. I'll be happy to run you through it.
Thank you.
That's a pretty good education tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions from the board for tonight? Otherwise, we need a motion to declare lead agency.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to declare us the lead agency.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
We also have Union Energy Center, 24 Miller Road for a site plan. That's the one we just did. We're doing the sketch plan now, correct?
We did it together.
Yeah, we did it together.
We're good with both then?
Yeah, once they get the final layout of the lot, then we could do our tabular information. I have no other problems.
So agenda items 5 and 6 are complete.
You can ask him to start from the top again.
Well, it's educational, right?
I can listen to Chief Fink all day. We're good.
Yeah, I know, that's excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. Hi, Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Most likely not. They'll likely have project counsel for the IDA.
So you're applicant's attorney?
No, I would be IDA attorney. And then they would have an attorney representing them as the applicant to the IDA.
But your role here tonight is?
My role here tonight is project attorney in case there was anything needed as it relates to zoning, but that's unlikely.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Have a good night.
Thanks.
You know what we would have said, right?
You're right, you're right,
That's why I chuckled when he said, no, they have another attorney.
you're
Still
right.
here, huh?
Okay. Next on the agenda is Braemar at Carmel, 49 Seminary Hill Road, reapproval of final site plan. Mike, did you have any comments on this?
No, I have no objection to the reapproval.
And Rich?
No objection to the reapproval, as long as no changes are made to the project. There are certain aspects of it that are still missing that are summarized in my memo. The applicant should just be made aware of it.
And Pat?
No objection, Mr. Chairman.
Any other comments from the board? This has been around for a while. I don't know if there's any new questions.
The only question I'd have is, what's the status? I mean, when do they think they'll be moving forward?
I don't have a groundbreaking date, but I think within the next, an expectation within the next 12 months is not an unrealistic assumption. The board's probably aware when this was originally approved, it was very shortly before the outbreak of the COVID-19 epidemic, and I don't need to explain what happened with senior housing and these types of facilities during that time, so that certainly slowed things down for quite a while. Most recently, there's also the banking industry disruption that happened in the last year. Their lending partner was apparently mixed up in that. They're just in the process of the paperwork of signing on a new lender for the project. They're still fully dedicated to the project as designed, as approved, and plan to move forward with it, in the near term.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to grant reapproval of the final site plan for 1 year.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. And last but not least, Success Realty, 11 Sunset Boulevard, regrading. Good evening. No charge for the education tonight. Mike, I don't believe you had any comment.
I did not have any comments. This is really Rich.
Yeah,
I think.
Rich?
So the applicant is here, the board should be aware that the applicant has already performed site work and has received a notice of violation, and that the work was performed within 100 foot of the wetland buffer and will need to be referred to the ECB. The overall disturbance is about 15,000 square feet. They need to develop a SWIP, which they provided sufficient information for that. However, they just have to do the NOI, the notice of intent, and submit to the New York State DEC. I have been working with Mr. Calise ever since the NOV came out, so that's why there are very limited comments, because he was working with us from the beginning. I gave him the regrading application, gave him the regrading specs, so he has followed through on that.
And Pat, I don't believe you had any comments?
No comments on this regrading, Mr. Chairman.
So, Rich, for clarity, this regrading, the applicant regraded what was there. There's no new soil or dirt brought into this, correct?
There was no fill brought into the site. It was just, I'll call it for lack of a better, top dressing and cleaning up within the area. The area disturbed, it's just, there's no planned new construction in any of the area. From years of neglect, there was ruts and runoff, and they just wanted to clean that up so it'd be more pleasant to look at. And now they're looking to finish that area. There's a few areas where it appeared to be an old chicken coop that might have collapsed over time. They'd like to get rid of that and the area left to work in, clean up the forest litter, the branches, the leaves, and all of that stuff, and then topsoil seed and perhaps some small landscaping.
Okay. Now, this would need ECB review, correct?
Yeah, you haven't been to the ECB, have you?
Actually, I have a packet for you, Rose told me to give it to you.
Gotcha.
For the ECB, for next Thursday is what she was.
So would we need a motion to send it to the ECB, Pat?
Yeah, you do.
Okay. First, are there any comments about this project here?
No, I think it's pretty straightforward, the application and the project.
He meant the board.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sitting there long enough, I should have been paying attention.
Good thing you didn't ask any comments.
So, yeah, just to recap, no fill is coming in?
No.
You're just leveling off, regrading existing soil?
And Rich can verify it, approximately, most of the lot now has been regraded and was stopped by the town justifiably, because it,
And they put up silt fencing when the NOV came up. So there's a pocket kind of pond in the back of this property, which is partially owned by the applicants, by the applicant and by two other property owners. It's a kind of a weird function. If you go past our landfill going toward Carmel, there's a little side road that turns up there. That's where Sunset Boulevard is. There's a bunch of houses up there. There's pocket wetlands in there. It actually goes behind the landfill and is considered, a national wetland inventory. It is on our thing, so on that type of mapping, and it feeds into the Croton, the Croton, which is down south, so it ends up down there ultimately. So it feeds into the Croton River, feeds into the Croton Reservoir. So that is why it's a protected wetland. It's weird, it's kind of just in the middle of nowhere, but, there it is. That's why they have to do this.
So I think we can do a couple things in parallel here. Maybe we need a motion to send to the ECB, and also a motion to schedule a public hearing.
I'll make a motion to send to the ECB.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. I'll make a motion to schedule a public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. So Rose submitted the minutes of July 26, 2023, and also August 10th, 2023. Would someone like to approve the minutes of July 26, 2023?
Mr. Chairman, I reviewed the minutes, made some minor comments to Rose. I propose, move approving the minutes, subject to those comments.
Second, subject to.
All in favor?
Aye.
Bob, would you like to make a motion for August 10th minutes?
Oh, I thought I was doing both.
We'll do one, we'll do them
Okay,
separately.
all right, same motion for August 10th, same level of comments, and make a motion that they be approved, subject to those comments.
Same second, subject to.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to adjourn? Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.